Colin, why don't you introduce yourself and what you're all about?
Sure, thanks. My name's Colin Christensen, and I happen to be the EIR here at MacEwan University, and serial entrepreneur, self-identified serial entrepreneur. So, been in and around business my whole life. My parents ran a fishing camp, or my mom and my stepdad ran a fishing camp in Northern Ontario, and I grew up literally like it was 150 years ago. We had no plumbing, no electricity. We did all our own logging, built our own log cabins, and fished and built ice houses. Would cut ice in the winter, and that's how we refrigerated food in the summer. So, as a teenager, that's what I grew up with, which was kind of a weird thing as a boy living in the deep bush without any girls around. It was kind of a disappointing time for me, but at the same time, it's very much romanticized now. So, but I think I've always had a bug and an interest in entrepreneurship. So, over the years, started and grown and worked on several businesses, sometimes jobs, and in between to fill in the gaps. And then I'll start a business and get that going. Sometimes they worked, sometimes they didn't. So we've had some great successes and some great losses in between.
Tell me a bit more about your just kind of starting out. Like, did you have any siblings? Do you?
Yeah, I come from, what do they call it, a blended family. So I have one real sister,
Yep.
and I have a stepbrother and stepsister from a new marriage, new relationship, and we're pretty close. I mean, I phone them on birthdays. We have some good conversations, but I've almost always been a pretty independent guy. I love my brothers and sisters, love my family, I have great parents, all that kind of stuff. But even from a young age, I would end up just hiking off. I'd make a lunch in the morning on a Saturday, take it, and I'd just spend the whole day in the bush and in the ravine, climbing trees and looking for Indian burial grounds or whatever that we used to do when I was a kid, and just exploring and being on my own and thinking and all that kind of stuff. So, pretty independent guy in general from the beginning.
I was going to ask you, what was your role in the family? Were you the big brother, the little brother? Were you an entrepreneur from day one? What was your role in the family dynamic?
I was I'm the big brother, and
Yeah.
my next sister, my real sister is 3.5 years younger than a year, for my next sister and then my stepbrother. So I was definitely the big brother, and so I was always a little bit outside of their little group as it was.
Right.
And always the entrepreneur, always the crazy big brother that was causing trouble, and probably the problem child for a lot of it and things like that. But it's my role. I mean, I don't know if I had a specific role in the family per se. It was just probably the one that everybody should make sure that they do something different then, because if he's doing it, probably not a good idea.
So what was your first business? What was the first lemonade stand?
Well, maybe the lemonade stand was probably mowing lawns.
Oh yeah.
Classic. We lived on an acreage. The thing that reminded me of that the most was we lived on a bit of an acreage in a small town called Acton, Ontario, and it was a 4.5 acre lot or whatever, and so I would mow that. Like, that was my job as the big brother or whatever. We had a little lawn tractor. But I remember somebody came to us, and there was a little graveyard up at the top of the hill, and somebody asked if I could mow that. And so that was my first kind of business, is I started to mow that and get paid for it on a regular basis. And then I whippersnippering around all the gravestones and keeping it looking good and all that. It wasn't a huge one, but it was a nice little a little bit of money that I had in my pocket. And then the neighbors started asking me, and we started growing a little bit of a lawn care business, if you will, just getting to mow lawns. And I was young, like probably 13, maybe even 12 or so, and just kind of getting into that. But then my first business, I don't know, even at 10 years old, I was thinking, I want to run a graphic design business. And do I know what that is? I don't even know if I know where that came from in my mind. But I started probably around 18. I started a graphic design business. I started doing graphics. I started, creating logos for people and drawing, because I had a passion for drawing.
What kind of
Sorry?
What kind of drawings?
Well, I started with fine arts. Like I just
Okay.
drew all the time when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Then I got into, heavy metal and loved doing
I was
that.
trying to get that out of you, the heavy metal.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, total metalhead. I love that kind of stuff. And so I remember my friends would ask me to draw. I showed up at a new high school, and it was really important to, my mom says, "Here, we're going to get you to wear this," and I'm like, no way am I wearing that to my first day of this new school. It was an opportunity for me to change my stars, if you will, because I was a nerd nerds are awesome and cool now, but they weren't when I was a kid. So I kind of wore different clothes, and I was right into the music anyway. But when we showed up at the school, I people were kind of checking who is this kid and all this kind of stuff. And I remember I started to draw Eddie from Iron Maiden, right?
Nice.
Like that.
Yes.
And so some of the kids my peers were looking over my shoulder going, wow, that's really good. Can you draw one for me? And that was some of the popular kids. Yeah, absolutely. Make a little bit of money. And then I started doing jackets, actually. So that,
nice.
I totally forgot about that. Started, the jean jackets and the little space on the back. And so I had one, I made one. Made one that Lee Aaron wore on stage, actually, so 80s, metal queen, actually quite literally metal queen. She wrote a song that. But then a bunch of my friends bought jackets, and I did those for them, and so that was some early entrepreneurship there. But I took that and wanted to make it a little bit more refined, so bought a computer, bought printers, bought the scanners, bought the all the stuff like that, and we actually formalized into a graphic design business that slowly ebbed and evolved over the years into what I do today. So,
were you ever at a crossroads between should I do the entrepreneur thing, or go down like a more typical path?
Like a job almost.
Yeah.
Well, that's a great question. I mean, I never wanted a job. And I don't know I had heard a term years ago called, ambitiously lazy, right? And that really sums me up to a degree. I work really, really hard, but it's in order to relax. Right, if that makes sense, to have downtime, to enjoy the freedom of my life, to enjoy life, really. And so I work hard, but I don't want a job. I've never been interested in a job. I struggle in a job. I think I'm mostly unemployable now, right? It's just, I don't think that way. And I look at trading hours for dollars, and I think that's insane. But then at the same time, I work 16-hour days, and often sometimes 7 days a week, but I don't feel like I'm working, if that makes any sense. So I've had, ironically enough, probably 40 jobs in my life, and some for a day
So
and some for, and some I've had to fill in, to make sure that I could provide for the family when a venture might have failed or blown apart. And we've had the unfortunate, or maybe the fortune too, in some ways. We've had to live off of $16,000 a year as a family of 5, right? Wow. It's just impossible. You can't do it. And so, but at that time, what do? You go and get a job, you work at whatever you can, and you do what you need to do. But it's always the stepping block to being back working for myself, doing my own thing, and doing what I love to do. So
what was the first, after the graphic design business, what was the first business venture that you created where you thought to yourself, this is the one,
sure,
this has real legs?
Well, so the graphic design thing kind of evolved into it grew up in doing somewhat classic graphic design, logos, brochures, tags, labels, stickers, annual reports, which were kind of fun, more graphic and layout and stuff like that. And all of that started, by the way, from a 3-month, going from fine arts into graphic arts was a 3-month course at some, little corner college or whatever. And I loved it. I just loved doing this technical graphic design on a computer. And that evolved slowly into all these different avenues and eventually into graphic. I got picked up by a team doing what do you call it, digital games, right? So early, back in the 90s, the CD-ROMs, and we created some games, and I started working for this company that was a lot of promise. We ended up winning a bunch of awards, and I was doing some graphics, but I ended up helping out with some of the other teams and leading the sound guys and the artists and all these things. And so eventually I got called to be a recruiter. I was applying for a job at some point because the company we had the promise of getting bought by Microsoft. And then, of course, at the last minute it pulled out, and my last paycheck was a TV and a VCR, right? And so that was that's how business goes some days, right? And so I ended up exiting from that, and was looking for work, and a guy called me and said, "Hey, you'd make a great recruiter." I'm like, "Excellent. What's a recruiter?" I had no idea. And so, but he said, "Yeah, you've got some sales, you've got some entrepreneurship, and you've got some business acumen, and you understand how technology, so you should be a recruiter." I'm like, all right. So I tried my hand at that, and I started that in, right at the Y2K era. And then I moved from Vancouver to Edmonton. I was born in Ontario, grew up spent 14 years in Vancouver, and then I moved in 2001 to Edmonton, and I started a business. I started a recruiting business. It's a lucrative business. At that time, it made some really good money into the .com era. And so, of course, my focus, starting a real business, was, make sure I had invoices, a logo, business cards, all the material, instead of actually getting customers. Right, so
you wanted the look of it, perhaps.
Totally,
yeah.
And I think that a lot of entrepreneurs make that mistake. So I got excited about doing all that, and then 9/11 hit, right? Yeah. And so my recruiting business kind of took a turn for the worst. I ended up going and getting a job again at a recruiting company, and we built that company to $10 million in revenue and some really, really cool stuff over the period of time. And then I went into another business after that again. So the jobs have been kind of in between to when I needed to create money for my business, my house, if you will, right? My family is my business. And then interspersed with that is the businesses that have kind of carried me and helped me to grow over the years.
So what, changing a little bit, what's your, what kind of drives you to be an entrepreneur? What's your mission? Is there something pushing you or pulling you?
I think
what gets you moving?
Yeah, at the beginning, I think there was this, and I think a lot of people have this. I don't know if there's kind of three big areas. One, I want to be famous, maybe, right? Mm-hmm. Not me. I never cared about that. I wanted to be behind the scenes at best. And two is I want to be rich, right? I want to run my own business so I'm wealthy and can have all the money in the world, right? I want to be Elon Musk or whatever. And then the third one is I want to be my own boss. And that's probably my biggest driver when I came into the idea of entrepreneurship is I didn't want to work for anybody else. I wanted the freedom to be able to do whatever I wanted to do. And frankly, it's kind of funny because it's taken probably about 30 years to get there in a lot of ways, but now I feel, probably have for the last 10 or so, feel the freedom of just being able to do what I want to do. I work all the time, and yet at the same time I can take a day off or go anywhere I want or fly around the world, whatever I want to do. And so those are the big things. But now, that was when I begun, right? Now, if you zoom forward, probably through some of the big disasters that I've had, now what drives me in my entrepreneurship is helping others. Like truly getting into the mindset of what is the entrepreneur journey and where are the hiccups and what are the landmines that are most likely going to go off in somebody's field of vision, and how do I help them avoid it, right? I say, how do I help people avoid needless failures? Because when I go back and I look at the times that I've been in the biggest trouble, the biggest challenges, the losing millions of dollars of other people's money or whatever, I needed support. I needed somebody around me. I needed somebody to talk to. I needed somebody who could help me navigate this. And it wasn't always just my mentor. I had lots of mentors. But it was just this, what am I missing here? And how do we navigate through this? And so that's why I wrote a book, The Entrepreneur Roadmap. I have an app now called Roots and Entrepreneur Roadmap. And these are some tools that I find that are very important. And we started a micro-lending platform helping entrepreneurs in developing countries because I believe entrepreneurship is at the core of everybody, right? My definition of an entrepreneur, is somebody who creates a consistent solution to a well-defined problem. Right? So an entrepreneur is somebody who creates a consistent solution to a well-defined problem. So if we know what the problem is and we understand it well, then we're going to create a solution for it, right? So that could be an employee, it can be a business owner, it can be anybody. If you're not doing a good job delivering for your job, you're going to get fired. So that's a solution for a well-defined problem. The boss knows what your problem needs to solve, or what you're solving, so you should do that for him. So even in entrepreneurship, it's no different. But the problem is when people start getting into this idea of entrepreneurship, E-Myth, a great book, they talk about that all the time. E-Myth says, okay, here's a baker. They're a really good baker. They love baking. I'm going to go start a business. Well, it's one thing to bake. It's another thing to actually go and say, okay, now I need to hire employees. I need to, negotiate a lease. I need to figure out where to put my business and how to market it and how to run finances. And that's a whole new world. So there's so much disaster that is potential around this idea of just going and starting a bakery, right? So how do we help that work? And so when I look at it from my motivation again, it's like, how do I help these people navigate this, just to do this and this and this? If you get those things right, you're going to be so much better off. And so starting a business in Honduras or Central America sometimes is just their only option, right? They want to start a business, or they want to go and get a job even, but they can't. They're too old, they're a woman, they're in a wrong class. These are all realities that, some people in the world have. And I'm like, well, how do we help them go and start something? That's their only option, so how can we help them to start something meaningful then?
One of the things that you told me was that when people talk about entrepreneurship, it's always about the highs, and
yeah.
There'll be lows, but it's very, sometimes that part gets glossed over.
True.
What are you comfortable talking about the lows?
I think we need to talk about them more.
Right.
Yeah. The mindset I have is everybody we talk to in entrepreneurship seems to expect awesome as an answer, right? How's it going? How's your business going, right? Yeah. Sometimes it's your detractors, it's your enemies, the ones that want to see you fail, and so you tell them it's going awesome, right? Sometimes it's the people that you're hoping are going to be successful. They want you to be successful, so you tell them it's awesome. How's it going from your wife's perspective? It's going awesome, so she doesn't freak out and you're thinking you're going to lose everything. From your customer's perspective, they want to deal with a good client, so good provider, good vendor, so you say it's awesome. And to your investors, oh yeah, it's going awesome, I'm protecting your money. But that's not the reality.
Yeah, you can never show that you're bleeding.
That's right, right. And I think that's wrong, actually. We are human, and as humans, we're flawed, and we make mistakes. And I think once we actually start talking about the mistakes more and being more vulnerable about those realities, I mean, we're seeing it now more in society with the stupidity that happened with the indigenous communities over the years, even just recognizing the Black Lives Matter, and even the problems and the mental challenges that come along with COVID, and there's this discussion that is happening that is a lot more real. We're seeing people in their pajama bottoms, or with their kids, or with their cats, and all these things, and we become this more rounded human because of it, and I love it. But now we have this opportunity to talk a little bit more about failures, right? To talk a little bit more about the realities of business. You can be awesome and then still have the challenges and the craziness that's going on underneath, but actually be able to, let's talk about that a little bit more, because people can be empathetic or sympathetic to each other. And you know what, you're struggling? Yeah. Oh, you know what, let's buy local. Our local people are having trouble, our local vendors are having trouble. Let's go buy pizza from that guy instead of, the big guy or whatever, right? Let's go buy something new from that guy that made it by their hands instead of just the big corporate, dude overseas that we don't know. And so, talking about disaster and talking about the challenges that come with business, I think this is the time and this is the opportunity to talk about it.
Tell me a story then.
Okay, going back to, so when I said I was a recruiter for a while, and we were doing that, and I had an opportunity to buy into a franchise. And I really was looking, my wife and I were planning a business that we had seen before, or we seen in another jurisdiction down in Oregon. And I'm like, oh, that would work really well here. We should do something like that. Ironically, it was the idea of a dinner and a movie, and that became the VIP cinemas, right? We know what that is now. It's kind of everywhere. Yes. It wasn't my, it's not, they didn't steal my idea or something. It was just inevitable that it would come. So, but at the time when we were looking at that didn't exist up here. And so we wanted to do something like that. But I was weighing that out. I got introduced to this business, this franchise opportunity, and I was really trying to figure out which one I wanted to take. And I chose the franchise because I knew I'd learn a lot about this and business and all those kind of things by having people in my life that I could learn from, right? And so we ended up, it went very, very well in the beginning. We were able to raise about $100,000 in the first month, in the first 30 days. I started talking with friends. It was in the golf industry, so yes. I often have joked around that the golf industry is kind of like selling legal heroin, right? People are very excited about golf, and they will spend money on golf even when it's not the greatest idea. But that's fine. And I'm not saying anything about my investors. I mean, they made good, wise choices to try to get involved in something like this. So we ended up raising some capital. We bought the rights across the prairies, and we started building, right? We started raising more money, and probably in the first year we raised almost $1 million. And it was going really, really well. And this is kind of mid 2000s, and we were, the economy started to shift. And I made a choice that was really bad. We ended up getting into a building and starting to build out the building before we had all the money, right? But it was just going so well, right? It was all positive. Money was flowing in like crazy. I had quit my full-time job and moved into this business because it was just happening so fast and so well. And then when the economy started to turn, we started losing investors that were excited about what they were doing. And so all of a sudden we're like, uh-oh. And then we started backpedaling. And then that started an 18-month journey of absolute crap, right? Just the craziest stuff. I started getting death threats from well-meaning and well-intended and well-deserving vendors, right? Because all of a sudden we couldn't pay bills. We were underneath on everything. Everything, our rent was being tied up, our hydro and bills were being tied up. I didn't have a salary, so we didn't have, all of a sudden all my personal credit cards were starting to go sideways. And for the next 18 months, we did this dance, and it was painful. It was crazy at times. And then in the middle of all of that, we got kicked out of our building and we lost the lease, but I didn't know that yet. But I ended up getting flesh-eating disease, of all things. And so I found out that I got really violently ill, and that was what saved me. Some people don't have that luck, let's call it, and so they don't even know, and they can die almost immediately just because they don't even know it's in their system. But I got violently ill, and through a lot of cajoling of my wife, go to the hospital. So we go to the hospital, and they're like, yeah, cellulitis, blah, 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 all this kind of stuff we didn't know. But then they started, and the Center for Disease Control went ballistic, and they're like, okay, we think we have a problem here. And so for the next 3 months, I was in and out of hospitals and surgeries and all these things. But while I'm sitting there kind of stabilized finally after the first week and a half where I almost died a couple of times and things, I'm sitting down in the room with my laptop in the hospital, termination notice of my lease, right? So here's the middle of this stuff. We've got $1 million plus in debt, and we're wrestling with all this stuff, trying to just keep the wheels on a little bit. I had to tell 12 employees that we couldn't hire them. They had all quit their jobs and were supposed to start on Monday, and on Friday I had to phone them all up and tell them that we couldn't have them start. And some surprising and amazing cultural things that happened at that time, and they all started wanting to work for us. One of the guys came in and invested a bunch of his own money and started working with me full time for free. Like, just incredible stories that kind of come out of this. But through a lot of this, as the wheels kept falling off and off and off, and we ended up losing about $4.5 million of ours and everybody else's money. And then in the middle of that, going through not bankruptcy yet, but we went through the flesh-eating disease and then kind of wrestled that and came back to that, and then still had to deal with the businesses. The promise of it all, I'm showing this beautiful space. We had 40,000 square feet, and we're showing this space in the dark with a flashlight. I've got IVs hanging out of my arm still. And to an investor that was promising and excited, and he's like $3.5 million. We answered all of his questions. He was very excited about it. He's like, yeah, we're in. And we decide to, so we're like, yes, finally, this is coming together. And, finally with all this craziness that's going on, it's starting to come together. He goes and does his due diligence, finds out that the franchise headquarters is basically shutting down in 30 to 60 days. So he's like, I can't invest in you. I'm like,
how do you weather all these blows coming at you? I mean, is there...
Well, for me, there's a couple things. One, make sure you have friends, right? Like, be open and transparent. I have tremendous network through I consider myself a Christian guy. And so I have some very deep, close friendships through my church. And that's taken a long time to build. But, through all of this, and some of them gave me money too. But even through losing it all and all that kind of stuff, they were able to stand by me and encourage me and work with me. Incredible, amazing wife. Melissa, my wife, is just the most astounding person. She's got a very sensitive but honed in security gland, I say, right? So she knows that's a little bit too much to one side, so she keeps me somewhat on the straight and narrow. But, great wife, great support system, open conversation, a lot of prayer, screaming and crying and, just trying to wrestle through it, but recognizing ultimately that life is life. I have a choice in the moment, in the darkest, worst possible time, to get up again, right? Do I just lay here and die, or do I, kind of figure out another day on how to get through it and what to do with it, and pray some more and figure it out and keep walking, right? Failure isn't permanent until you decide to make it permanent, right? And you just kind of get up. And now it's like, ironically enough, I probably wouldn't trade any of it, right? I mean, I know I made some massive mistakes, and I know other mistakes were made around me that I couldn't affect. Yeah. And so, those combinations created a bit of a perfect storm. Throw in flesh-eating disease on top of it all, and you get this mess. But it's not about the strength, that you're walking into it going, I got this. No, it's you just, in the moment, you make a decision to survive and keep going and hope that there's another day that works, right? And it worked, right? We just kept going, and now I'm like so excited about some of the background and some of the things I've learned and some of the ways I do things. And now to me, it's like that whole shift. You asked me earlier, a shift away from why I became an entrepreneur to no. Like, I want to take anything and everything I've learned and turn it around and get it into the hands of the people that need it earlier. Like, how can I help them to avoid those disasters? How can I talk to them in their space to allow them? And some couldn't care less, and some are like, oh my goodness, tell me more, right? And that's, you just can't get more excited about those early entrepreneurs.
So you're on a mission.
Yeah, 1 billion entrepreneurs. That's what I want to do. I want to help 1 billion entrepreneurs. So I got a lot of work to do. And it's not, obviously, it's me. It's all the folks around that we're going to get support and help from, and and have feeding them off to other people, and them feeding them off to me. And how do we just create this fabric, this network of people and communities around the world that are going to, really help and support entrepreneurs in a good way.
So what's your vision for? I'll let you set the scope. So
sure.
What's your vision for the city, the province, the country, the world? How big is the scope, and what's your vision of it?
Well, I mean, at 1 billion entrepreneurs, that's a lot of people.
That's a lot of people.
But if you go back to, okay, so there's kind of a few classifications, I'd say, of business. And I think my hope, there's a couple of things that I really hope for. One is that innovation, because I think innovation is at the heart of entrepreneurship, for sure, right? Somebody coming up with, they have their own unique view of the world, and when they look at the world, they see a problem, and when they identify and clearly understand that problem, they try to solve it. That's innovation, right? From Copernicus to Newton to, the guy that created Red Cross to, whatever, to Mallory that we had on earlier. These people are seeing the world in their unique eyes, identifying that problem, and creating a solution for it. So that's innovation. It doesn't have to be tech. And I'm not saying there's anything negative about tech. Tech is an enabler, but tech is as constant as what we have in our power bills and our, it's the energy around us, our phones. It's just an enabler. It's just there as part of the utility grid for us to build on, right? So innovation is more important than technology, for starters. Second of all, the other framework that I try to shift a lot of time is, what is an entrepreneur? And to me, there's kind of the classifications, and I don't want to be too generalized, but the classifications of entrepreneurs to me is, one is just emancipatory entrepreneurs. This idea of just starting something so you have a little bit of money, right? Whether it's $500, a side hustle, a couple bucks a month to pay for extra groceries, to having to survive, like some of the stuff I've had to go through, having to survive in a way just to create your own story, right? Survive. That's one level of entrepreneurship. And if people only want to get there and that's all they ever want to do, awesome. Like, how can I help you, right? Then there's the next level where it's like, okay, now you start building into maybe what we might call an SME, right? A small medium enterprise. And this idea of, now you've got a couple of employees. Now you've got a little bit more investment maybe needed. Now you might need a location, right? And so, my son, my middle son is doing streaming, right? He's not making a ton of money, but he makes a couple of bucks here and there, which is kind of cool. Never something I would have thought of, but he plays video games and people pay him to watch him play video games. Yeah, what a life, right? That's that emancipatory business. Just go and start something and do something cool for yourself, right? Then there's the businesses where you start employing people and building a location and having a little bit of investment. That's that middle layer, right? And there's a lot more support and a lot more supports for those types of people, especially if they're in technology. But then there's the group where now you're getting into scaling, right? Now it's like, okay, I've built a little mom and pop shop, or I've built a little retail store, or I've built a little thing, but I want to take this bigger. I want to franchise it. I want to turn it into making a million widgets and get it out to the world. I want to, scale. And that's going to take bigger investment, more employees, and possibly multiple locations. So those three streams are different in themselves, but they're all entrepreneurs. And so for me, my vision for the world would be to create more opportunities and be more accepting of every level. Right now, especially in the US, North America in general, there's this real focus on what we call unicorns, right? The billion-dollar valuations. Right? And that's great, but it's created a very negative connotation about business. If you don't just search out the money, you're not doing it right. Yeah. You're an unworthy entrepreneur. And I'm like, no, what about the folks that are just trying to make $500 a month? Pay for the family, put food on the table. That's just as vital, if not more vital, than just another economic driver. They're all economic drivers. If I can be an employer versus an employee, I think we're doing something good, right? So my vision for Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, the world, is to truly help entrepreneurs do what they want to do at every level, at any level. And so you might have heard me talk about this before, but this idea of there's really two parts, and I think we get them muddled together too much. But there's the driver and a vehicle, right? A great driver can drive any vehicle. And so the driver's the entrepreneur and the vehicle's the business. A good driver can identify when there's a problem in the vehicle, right? But when they start to get too combined, we run into problems, right? My identity is wrapped up in my business, so if the business fails, I'm a failure. No. That happens sometimes. Sometimes you drive into a wall and you got to get out and go another day. Right? And so the identity of the entrepreneur, I think, is much more valuable to teach the entrepreneur some of the core elements of being a good entrepreneur, to recognize some of the things. I mean, there's some fundamentals that you have to know, right? Use a turn signal. That's maybe a message to a lot of the drivers out there. But, but also in the vehicles may come and go. But if you look at the current economy, a lot of the focus is not on the entrepreneur, it's on the vehicle. Ooh, look how special that vehicle is. It's great, it's employing some people, but ultimately it was started by an entrepreneur. And if we can have more people think like entrepreneurs, then I think we're going to have more successful opportunities in the business.
Could we call this entrepreneurial literacy?
It's a good start, yeah. If we could, honestly, if we could start teaching some of that, right? I mean, the current education system has a lot been set up around, you know, factories and industrial revolution and for good needs too. But teaching creativity and leadership and you know, basic financials and you know, how to tell a story and some of the fundamentals like that, I think would be even far more valuable, right from the early ages. I've had the opportunity, I mean, one of the funnest stories is going in and teaching innovation and entrepreneurship to kindergartners. Right? Like craziest, most open minds ever, right? It's so much fun. But it's also funny, you know, I'm sitting there, I'm standing in front of a crowd and the teachers, you know, they're all sitting there, hands in the basket, you know, sitting cross-legged looking up at me, and the teacher's introducing me, and I can hear the front row kid turn to his friend and go, "He has a belt buckle." Right? I'm like, okay, this is going to be fun. Right? But they're, you know, and they're explaining. I get them pitching even, and to have them pitch and start telling their stories, and it's like, and this is when I got the Band-Aid, and you know, and I'm like, it's so much fun to watch that. But all the way through, being able to start talking about how to identify, look at, and create solutions to problems is, I think it's root to all of us, but we've lost a lot of it. You know, you gotta follow the system. But yeah, you can follow the system, but look around and see what might be the problem to solve, right?
Well, Colin, it's been a pleasure. Do you have any last things you wanted to get off your chest or tell the world? Do you have a hope for the world?
Yeah, well, my hope for the world is that,
yeah,
you know, people actually use their incredibly unique and amazing views of the world and the way that they see things to start, you know, looking at using those things to see the problems in the world and try to figure out how to solve it. It doesn't have to be them particularly solving it, but whether it's a small problem of lawn care for their neighbors, yep, to you know, creating, you know, the next cancer solution or whatever it might be. We all have those unique voices. Don't just give up on them. Use them for good, for you, for your family, and for your neighbors, and for the world. So.
And how do we get in contact with you? How do we reach you?
Well, I have a couple of things that are really important that I want to get out there. One would be the Root app, right? So download on Android and Apple. It's free. There's a paywall in there, but it's pretty inexpensive even if you need to use it. You don't even need to go into that. But you can find that at rootapp.ca, so ROOT, rootapp.ca, and that's where you can find a lot about me anyway. Entrepreneurroadmap.ca is kind of more of a bigger site, but I'm also happen to have the opportunity to serve as the EIR here at MacEwan University, and so anything and any way you want to get a hold of me to do that and reach out and find out more about how to just get involved in entrepreneurship, I'd be excited to help.
Great, thank you very much.
My pleasure, thanks.